All right, does everybody mind if we just get going?
We have to take approved minutes and public comments.
Right, so I'm just calling us to order, okay? And is there any public comment that we have? Doesn't sound like we have any public comment.
Yeah, so we should probably do a quick roll call just for the record.
Okay, sure.
Councilmember Nguyen. Councilmember Nguyen is muted.
Here.
Councilmember Burns. Here. Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
Councilmember Kelly. Councilmember Newsma.
Here.
Councilmember Reed. Committee member McMillan. I think he might be
You're
muted.
muted.
Here.
Committee member Rikus
Here.
and Chair Livingston.
Here. Okay, so now we're called to order. Thank you. All right, jump the gun there. So we were not able to approve the minutes at the last meeting. Hopefully, Ms. Rosinski, did you have any public comment? We already sort of jumped over that, but if you have any public comment. You're muted.
Councilmember Reed has just joined.
Okay,
You might be able to unmute her, David.
I can unmute now, sorry. Yes, what I'm here to say is I really don't want us to be passing more debt and more bonds when it says on resolution 1923, we have so much debt, this would be another $1 million. We found $10 million since the budget was passed. We had 14.1 and now we almost have 15 million. And I think that we really need to be 100% transparent financially with people before we start issuing a possibility of another $17 million. So as a resident, I'm very opposed to this. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
thank you. All right. Very good. So with respect to the minutes from the prior meeting, they were attached both to the prior meeting and reattached now. Does anyone have any comments with respect to those minutes from the February 14th meeting?
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes.
Second.
Okay. All right, we'll have a vote.
Councilmember Nguyen.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly.
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Indicates in the affirmative.
Committee member McMillan.
Aye.
Committee member Rikus.
Aye.
Chair Livingston.
Aye. Okay. Very good. So the resolution before us, which we're moving to discuss and vote on, because of not having a quorum in the last meeting. Hitesh, maybe you could clarify further, but it is my understanding what this resolution does. First, it does not approve a new bond issuance. It does not. It is sort of anticipating that we could have one later in the year, which was your current view, but it is not the approval of the bond issuance. But if we do not pass this resolution, then to the degree the general fund advances money to the capital fund or whichever other fund to make payments, and I think there's one significant one that might happen. Maybe this Biggs could take us through. Then when we do get to a bond issuance, we could only reimburse the general fund for any advances that have happened within 60 days of that bond issuance. So if there is something on the order of a $9.5 million, which I think is what was mentioned in the last meeting, payment to IDOT, and that was done prior to 60 days of an eventual bond issuance, that money would not be reimbursable to the general fund. So I would, we're going to want to do more relative to what is the exact timing on an eventual bond issue and what is the appropriate amount for that bond issuance and why. But this is just an agreement that in the, when we do have a future bond issuance, that we would be able to repay any monies that have come out of the general fund back to the general fund. Because even though we did have a surplus and we're still evaluating this year's position, I think that some of these capital payments, if they are not reimbursable to the general fund, would have a very large impact on available surplus in the general fund. And likely we want to be able to use that surplus to fund other matters like pension, like whatever it, other sort of operating expenses or other matters. So Hitesh, could you please just please re-verify that my understanding is correct of what this resolution does?
Good evening, Chair Livingston, members of the committee. Yes, you are right. This is the procedural action to reimburse the city out of the future GEO bonds. And why city has been doing this? Because obviously the budget is passed in November or December of a year of the CIP and other funds. So obviously the department, Lara Biggs, Public Works, Parks, Recreation, and others, they start spending money from January 1. And in the Evanston's history, most times we have issued the bonds in late summer, August, and then settlement in September, except one time when I think we did it in May, June. So what happens is we have the projects which are to be funded out of the bond funds, but we don't have the bond money until late in the summer. So that's where this reimbursement resolution comes into the picture. Typically, we do it in January, February, because you can, I think you mentioned that you can go 60 days prior to the date of resolution. And you can reimburse only up to that date. So in case this vote is delayed and so, okay, if you do it in say May, June, you can go 60 days back. So whatever the money we have spent, which are originally supposed to be funded out of GEO funds from say January to April, we cannot reimburse out of the GEO bonds if we issue it in the future. So that's the one thing. So it's a procedural thing, what we call a reimbursement resolution. The second thing is, I know that many have concerned that, is this an approval of the bond? No. Whenever we issue the bond, you can go back into the city of Evanston history. We have to do an ordinance, particularly it's like issuing the debt. So it's, yeah, so it's obviously two readings, introduction of the bond ordinance, and then finally the adoption. And with the Finance and Budget Committee in place, obviously that would come to the Finance and Budget Committee first. Any bond issuance, it would be discussed, and if the Finance Budget Committee feels in the future that yes, we need to issue the bond, and then what amount of bond issuance, then that recommendation would go to the City Council in the form of an ordinance. And it takes at least 2 to 3 month process working with our financial advisor, bond counsel, and whatnot. So this is in no way you are approving any bond or debt issuance.
I think you'd have to agree that we're certainly paving the way for it with something like this. And the other part I'm really struggling with, Hitesh, is just the whole preface being, hey, we suddenly found $10 million. It seems to me again and again and again that we have very little understanding of what our surpluses really are in the general fund, let alone the other funds. So I mean, if you've already found 10 million, I guess I don't know why we really have to go back and refund the general fund. And I guess I wonder how much more you're going to find. I mean, between October and February, there's a $10 million swing. That seems enormous to me.
I mean, one thing which I think we mentioned in the last meeting, obviously, and we try to bring it up all the revenue trends. I mean, we have the trends even presented last, particularly about the major revenues like transfer tax, the PPRT, sales tax, and all that. And we read these things from the financial institutions, others. I think I have shared even a couple of other cities news which were in there, I think with the chair and the others. And the second thing is, that being said, we presented one slide, I think in the last meeting, that, okay, what are the potential options? Like this 23 budget was balanced with use of $10 million as a fund balance use. So that's not a true revenue. So whatever surplus you talk about it, we have to take out $10 million because we balance the general fund. And when I say we, means the city council adopted 23 budget with a use of $10 million of fund balance. That's the one thing. Second thing is annual shelter project, like animal shelter project, I'm sorry. It's like an approved by the city council with a roughly $1.5 million. If we get half of that, it could be around $750. Police and fire contracts, which would approximately cost us around $3.5 million to $4 million, more than what we have budgeted. And then obviously APSME contract on that line. Any public safety pension, which we decide to give beyond what we have budgeted right now out of general fund. Transfer to the insurance fund policy. You know, I mean, we looked at the budget policies. Insurance fund has been running negative. And if you can see that in our audit report, the auditors bring up, okay, management, what are you trying to resolve this negative cash balance and fund balance insurance fund? Our policy says that we should keep at least 1/3 of the outstanding claims of the previous audit as a positive cash surplus, so which is roughly around $2.5 million. Against that, we are running a negative cash of 1.5. So I need $4 million there. And then finally, yeah, this is more recommendation. I will the finance committee and the city council looked at it to go back to a 20% of the fund balance policy from 16.66. So when you see this kind of surplus, it's good thing, yeah. I mean, absolutely, you know, and we are focusing more on the revenue side. We have increased some of those revenues and during the budget process, and we are looking at and reading at IML, IGFOA, the other banks about the overall economic environment and their impact on our some top 5 to 6 revenue. But that being said, look at the money which we might need in 23. In 10 million.
Again, I just can't, you know, it over and again, we always seem to have these swings in what our surplus really is. So it's very hard to ask people to vote on things when I don't really think we have much of a handle on that. The other comment I would make is at one point, I think it was Laura Biggs who talked about, well, historically we sort of $14 million of debt has rolled off and we put $14 million back on. Something to that effect, Laura, I think. As rates were falling for 20 years, that worked. But now we're in a very different environment. We're in an environment where, you know, our debt's rolling off in the 2 handles and we're rolling debt on in the 5 handles. To me, if we keep reflexively incurring more and more debt every year, it's like, okay, well, you know, wash with this hand, rub with this hand. We're going to go broke if you're continuing to, you know, because the coupons are so much higher now, and we're going to be issuing debt into an environment where we don't, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty in this environment. I don't know how that math works anymore. So, you know, to just always be like, oh, we'll just issue more debt, it's just going to cripple the city ultimately, because you're going to have debt service that's, you know, going to offset any benefit we have from the pensions. So I just, you know, I just plain don't understand the math. I mean, it worked to our favor, David, for many, many years. Yes, because of falling rates, but now it's a whole different environment. I think you'd have to agree with that.
It is a higher expense environment, and that's putting more pressure on us to have good projections that we can use to understand what's going on primarily within the general fund, and that will reflect a higher degree of interest for sure. I would say that almost any bond offering, be it a city, be it a corporation, a major part of that bond offering is just to refinance your maturities. That is largely what goes on with most bond offerings.
Well, right, but if your maturity, if the debt that's rolling off is low price debt, you know, we have.
It is. Are you prepared to raise taxes then to fund those maturities?
Well,
I mean, that's going to be our
choice. What I'd love
choice.
to do is see expenditures reduced. You know,
Okay.
I know things like a $9 million animal shelter, I really can't understand how that was approved. Things, projects like that, and I think we've just got to get a handle on what our surpluses really are.
So getting better
Sure.
forecasting is part of our process. It's
Mhm.
part of our process. I do think that with respect to 2023, we do need to take a harder look at the revenues that are in the projections. I mean, that we went through that in the meeting last time, and I think it is still to be determined, even with some of the cost increases that Mr. Desai just went through, what the best number is to think about what our current projection is in the general fund, in particular for 2023. That work needs to be done, because it just appears by looking at the line items that there could be some upside in other areas. But I think in our next meeting, I would really like Mr. Desai and team to give us a better, an updated view on in addition to some of these cost increases, are there revenue changes that they would recommend that we put into this outlook for the year? And
But I think we also have to look at the expenditure side.
well, we
And
will.
these reflexive, just kind of spending money, as I said, we've had 20 years of record bond coupons coming down, so we got away with it. But that's just not going to happen on a go-forward basis, I don't think.
Mhm. It likely would be more expensive. So I think
We have inflation,
look,
we have things that, expenditures are more expensive. We have inflation going up, we have rates rising, and there seems to be a willing suspension of what the new paradigm likely is on a go-forward basis.
and so we'll build our projections, and we can look at what are areas to cut, what are areas to raise revenue, how do we get better visibility on some of these revenue streams. We did go through in the meeting last time, and there were some very good reasons why primarily it was revenue generated, why the revenues in the last part of the year exceeded the projections that were used in September, October. So we absolutely, and we've discussed as a group, need to continue to refine our forecasting tools. So at any point in time, we have a better view of the current year, and we have a better view of the near-term years. And we're working on multiple streams in order to do that. So I don't disagree with you at all that the level of precision in our forecasting needs to be better. And I think we're developing the tools to make that better, and the communication to make that better. And we will continue to make progress, and shouldn't have that degree of variance. But inflation has had a big impact on our revenue streams, which is good. Okay.
And our expenditures.
And our expenditure, and the expenditures have lagged, right? That is, what we've talked about a couple of times, that if you look at 2018, the budget was largely in balance, and we were right at our fund levels. And then at our suggested fund levels. And then 2021, 22, 20 was pretty flat. I mean, Clayton took us through this last time. 21, 22, what you had was revenues that were highly reactive to inflation, and costs that were less so because of contracts, because of open positions, because of projects that got delayed, ended up creating the couple of years of large surpluses. But as we have seen, at least using the current numbers, and again, we need to relook at revenues. 23 is turned into a negative 10 before some of these changes. But again, I'm hopeful it's not 10. I'm hopeful the revenues can go up more. So we have to do all that, and we have to get better forecasting, and we're working on all that. I think that to not approve this resolution, which gives us the flexibility to reimburse ourselves for any advances we have to make out of the general fund, would be a mistake.
But David, you keep talking about revenues. I don't know why it is we're completely, or there's a seeming unwillingness to talk about expenditures.
I'm not opposed to talk about expenditures. I would say that the city council has approved certain expenditures, including the new public safety contracts, and those are real costs that are going to have to be funded. And they approve the animal shelter, and if anybody else wants to.
Yeah, may I say something? I would like to respond if I can.
Hey,
So I just want to say, David, I mean, expenditures include in this resolution, it says that we are approving issuing obligations, which I noticed the word bond is left out, but we all know that means a GO bond of up to $17.7 million. That's an expenditure. That's like $1 million a year in finance and interest fees. So that's an expenditure you're so willing to just say, okay, sure. Of course. And by the way, I think we're all here on the Finance and Budget Committee. We all understand this is not a hearing, a bond hearing. So we didn't need that explanation. As Leslie pointed out, this is giving direction to staff to say, sure, if you need to issue that amount, come back and we'll have a bond hearing for 17.7. In absolutely no way can I say I'm in favor of leveraging that kind of debt on our Evanston taxpayers at 17.7, which is saying, and here in item number 3, it is saying that we would allow that we would approve up to $17.7 million. Now that is going to be about an expenditure, David, of about $1 million, I don't know, $1 million to $1.5 million a year in fees and interest. So when you amortize that, so I just, that expenditure, it's funny how you're willing to just say okay to that. And that really concerns me. And while I'm here, I just have a question. What did we vote on in terms, I know last year we voted, like we included, was it 18 million for a bond for the 23? Was that the amount?
Hitesh would have to answer that.
I mean, I think we did.
I mean, the last year,
capital
the city,
improvement.
I mean, I'm talking about the reimbursement resolution which the city council passed on January 10th of 22, and the total bond amount was around $11 million.
No, for this year, I think in the capital improvement for 23, there was part of that included issuing a bond for this year. And I'm just asking what that amount was. I think it was 18, but I'm not. I know it reduced from somewhere in the 20s.
Right, that is that 17. I think Lara would have the differentiation between the 22 bonds and 23 bonds.
We didn't issue bonds in 22. A bond.
No, with the to be funded. I mean, again,
no, but we didn't issue any bonds. Let's stop talking 22 bonds. I mean, that's really confusing for people. A bond, when you say a 22 bonds, it means we issued one and we didn't. So I wish we would stop referring to 22 bonds. We didn't issue any bonds in 22, which I'm very proud of. We saw a significant reduction in our debt for the first time in many years because of that. And but I think it was 18 million, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Laura? Do you know? I think we voted to.
Just to clarify, was the resolution last year the same format as the resolution this year?
Yes.
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 So here's.
So my point is, and just let me, Councilmember Kelly, to Councilmember Rikus, that city council passed the resolution last year. Did we issue the bond? No, we still did not. So this resolution does not bind the committee or any council members to move forward with anything.
We understand that, but it tells right here in item number 3, it says that the obligation to be issued is to be issued for the projects is $17,706,000. So we would be approving, we would be giving, not approving. We all understand this is not a bond hearing or that we're approving an actual bond. It's giving direction to staff to say, yeah, if you need to take out leverage 17.7 million on the taxpayers for the next 20 years, at a fee of over $1 million a year to finance that, we're fine with that. And I'm not fine with that. And I think we have to be really clear on that. I also am not fine with that because of the lack of transparency. Now, granted, some money I know comes in when you look at accrual or however we're doing the accounting for various funds that come in from January that were for December payments. But I agree with Ms. McMillan. I mean, we said first it was a $7 million surplus, then we pushed a little harder and lo and behold, it was 14.1. And then now we're hearing, we actually have somewhere around 25 million. So when we approved, and I think it was 18 million, I don't have that at my fingertips, but I do remember, I don't know if we voted, but I thought we did vote as part of the CIP budget, bonding out a certain amount for this year. And I think it was 18, but I don't. If you find it, let me know. So even with that, we approved 18, if that is the number that we approved to issue a bond for this year to cover our CIP budget. That was with the understanding that we had 14 million in surplus. Now we know that it's at least, somewhere around the ballpark of 25. So with that, I can't say, okay, to the same amount, 17.7. That wouldn't be right. That wouldn't be right for our residents to say that I'm okay with issuing that amount, given that I didn't know what we really had on the table at the time of our budget.
And I think this says this is the maximum amount. So
Right. And
it
I'm
says
saying
it's
that,
the maximum amount.
right. And
And
I can't accept that as a maximum amount. It needs to be reduced significantly. And I think
I
we
mean,
should
do we
come
need
back.
to do the, I mean, Lara, do we want to council member, do you want to change the amendment on this thing and we could go to the council? That, okay,
Councilmember
only
Kelly,
up to
can-
$10 million.
I-
I don't know how the committee members feel.
I'm next in line after Councilmember Reed, so I'll hold my comments until after Councilmember Reed has had a chance.
So yeah, so I would like to see it reduced by at least the amount that we have, like now the additional surplus that has come in, because when we voted on the amount to allocate and bond for our CIP budget, I would like it to be reduced at least by the amount that we've now, the additional surplus that has surfaced. That's what I would ask.
okay, Councilmember Reed, please.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt the flow with Councilmember Newsom, but I do very quickly want to just interject because there's been a lot of. I want to take a set to level set and first acknowledge staff. I understand what Councilmember Kelly and Committee Member McMillan their concern is, but one thing I want to highlight is I appreciate staff coming to us with revisions to the budget and updating surpluses, whether it's from 7 million to 10 million or whatever it is. I think that's important. Some of us have been around for a while, and I think we can appreciate that there may have been previous administrations who wouldn't have been as transparent, particularly with such large surpluses. So I just first want to highlight, I appreciate Hitesh and Clayton and the whole team for coming forward and making sure that we have a clear understanding of where our books are. So that's one. Two, I do want to understand. I know Hitesh, you touched on this previously during a council meeting when I asked this, but we issued this line of credit, or we got a line of credit for $15 million. Why is the line of credit not something we can tap into? And if, and I think I recall what your answer is going to be. And if so, if it's because of interest rates are lower on the bonds right now, even though interest rates are going up, what's the point of the line of credit then, if not for a situation like this?
Okay, so to answer your question, yes, one thing is if I go with, say, right now, line of credit might cost me around, 5.7, 5.8. If we issue the bonds for 20 years, which is a fixed rate bonds, could settle around 4.25, I don't know. So that's the big difference, that 150 basis points line of credit. And that too, line of credit is a kind of variable rate. So if the rates go up, we have to go up. Like if they go up by 100 basis points in the next 6 months, then unlike the bonds. Good thing about the line of credit keeping there is, and in this kind of circumstances where the rates are high, we haven't issued the bonds, but the city council has approved the projects in 22, in 23. And so obviously the staff has moved forward with those projects. When we make the payment for those projects, where does that money come from? Because those projects in 22 or now in 23 are intended to be funded out of the bond proceeds. We haven't issued the bond last year. So obviously we are missing out that $10 million. Now in 23, if we don't issue the bonds for next 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, or never, but still the projects are approved as a part of the budget by the city council. So what we do is, in case, the market is still bad and we need the funds and we have a cash flow situation, I can tap in as a last resort, even after using a little bit money from general fund and other funds as a temporary loan to the CIP. The last resort would be, I have to tap into that and use that money until we feel that, okay, we have a now reasonable bond market where we can go out and issue the bonds for a full 20-year fixed loan.
If I can
guess-
highlight that point. Go ahead, Leslie, please.
I guess I still come back to why on earth do we feel like we have to have these enormous surpluses. You know, and if we do have to use short-term debt on a interim basis before we know exactly how much long-term debt we need to issue the bonds, then fine. But I think we should have a much deeper understanding of what our surpluses really are. If we have to tap into our line of credit for 2 months in order to, you know, put into place a smaller long-term bond issuance, I'm all for that. That's what makes sense.
Chair, or thank you. I appreciate that, Member McMillan. Chair, I would ask, and all committee members, those who have spoken, if we can give, if we can move through the order and then go circle back for second rounds. So I'll pause there for now. I want to let Councilmember Newsome go. I do want to follow up with a few more questions. I will say that generally I am not supportive of issuing new bonds or even beginning to set the framework for the issuance of new bonds if there is the possibility either to, as Councilmember Kelly is calling for, to, you know, reduce the, you know, the maximum possible issuance or not issue the bonds at all. But my support for moving in that direction would hinge on having a deeper understanding of what are the cost projections out there, and, you know, do we have the reserve? Do we have the balance to cover those costs? And what extent do we have that balance to be able to do that? So that's what I would be hinging my vote on. So for the folks who are really pushing for that, and for staff, that's where my vote will lie. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Newsome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just kind of a procedural question here to start. Are we, if we approve this ordinance, are we bound by this ordinance to spend the money on the funds that are included in, or on the projects and in the amounts that are included in this packet?
No, this is a resolution. So this is just a procedural resolution.
A procedural resolution, rather. Right. So we would approve, you know, bonds being issued up to $17.7 million. We could spend that money, assuming we do issue the bonds, we could spend that money for whatever we wanted. Exhibit A in our packet is how we are at this point planning to spend that money, but that could change going forward.
Absolutely. Any infrastructure projects, yes. Capital projects.
Right. And so how many more infrastructure projects are there on our to-do list, and how much would that cost? You know, I know there's a lot more that we need to do than we are currently contemplating right here. So just to have that kind of perspective, maybe that's a Laura Biggs question.
So I guess I'm not quite clear what exactly you're asking. Is it how many more projects so far this year do we need to do, or?
Well, we've got a pretty long list of capital improvement needs.
Yes.
Like only some of which we're contemplating doing in 2023 and funding with this, you know, potential bond issue. So my question is, like, is this, what fraction of our total capital needs does this bond issue represent?
There are a lot of big open-ended questions right now in the capital program, because we have several facilities that need substantial work, and we haven't really got an approved plan on how we're moving forward with some of them, and we don't have an approved plan for funding for others, which is something the staff has been working to get that information together. But this year, after we went through all of the several meetings with City Council to down select projects, it's still less than what was shown in the capital program for each year of the next 5 years. And we are working also on a project to try to get a longer term capital improvement program so that we can try to smooth some of these out. But I mean, ultimately, we have a number of facilities and park infrastructures where we're just going to either be making emergency repairs at a premium, shutting down the buildings, or removing playground infrastructure.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
that's,
the projects we're contemplating funding with this bond issue are the highest priority, you know, the
Mhm.
oldest infrastructure, the real true emergency needs. You could spend easily 2 or 3 times this amount of money doing stuff that everyone would love to see done. But we're
If we have
exercising
to.
some fiscal restraint and only limiting our capital improvement plan to the highest priority stuff.
Yeah, so we went through this exercise with city council as part of the budget process, where rather than staff down selecting all of the projects, we sort of put out there what we thought were the most urgent needs and asked city council to provide priorities. And then over time, we nibbled that down to what is the current capital program based on what the city council set as the priorities.
Right. So the council has already set those priorities and, you know, approved that capital improvement plan. So the task now for the Finance and Budget Committee is to help figure out how to pay for it. And we've had some constructive conversations here that are relevant to that discussion. We've had some other discussions which are important to have about controlling costs and improving our projection capabilities, but are not really part of this discussion in front of us tonight. So I guess, you know, I'm prepared to vote in favor of this resolution, knowing that it's not a commitment to issue these bonds. We still have an opportunity to you know, do some value engineering and cost cutting when and if it might be appropriate. We're not obligating ourselves to spend this money right now, but we are leaving ourselves open the possibility of kind of paying ourselves back. And if we delay this action, we won't be able to pay ourselves back as much. So this is knowing that this is the same you know, type of resolution that we passed last year and then ultimately didn't issue bonds. You know, I'm prepared to move this forward and vote on this tonight. So I'll leave my comments at that for the moment.
Okay, Mr. Rikus? Ms. Rikus, your hand was raised.
Yes, I think a lot of the comments made is future work, and I think it's very important. And I especially like Ms. McMillan's comment that we may do, even though it's higher basis points, it may be prudent to do short-term funding till we really get our handle on the long-term funding. So I'm fine with that. And I agree, we do need to pass the resolution. The one thing that gives me pause is in section 2 and 3, where it says reimbursement, the city reasonably expects to reimburse and pay the expenditures with the proceeds of an obligation. I think that's okay. But then it says section 3, the maximum principal amount of the obligation expected to be issued for the projects is 17.7. I've read this about 4 or 5 times. And when I see the word expected, it's almost like we're blessing this, the 17. And I was just wondering if, I know it's semantics, but the maximum principal amount of the obligations could be issued of 17.6. I would feel much more comfortable with that than the word expected, because expected makes it sound like it's a foregone conclusion that it's going to be 17.7. So that's my comments, but I do feel we need to move forward to give the flexibility for these projects that I believe were approved by the city council already and need to be paid for. So that's what I wanted. And I do agree that there's a lot of work we need to do, but that's not on tonight's agenda. It's the resolution tonight.
And I'm sorry that your words instead of expected were.
I'm just brainstorming that the maximum principal amount of the obligations to be issued, just take the word expected out, to be issued for the projects, because expected sounds like we're going to do it. And I don't know if that would give everyone else a little more clarity and a little more, maybe there's another word that we may issue up, instead of word expected, may be issued for the purposes up to this, 17.6.
And can we make that change? Does Hitesh, do you know? Could we take expected out, given we posted this is what we're voting on?
We would just move to amend it. So you
Yeah.
could amend it here.
And would we
Sherry,
have-
Sherry, you could make that a motion right now.
Well, should we wait till we put it up for a vote, or I can make the motion now?
You have to make the motion first and then we vote on it.
Okay, so whoever's better legalese than me, but I make a motion that the word expects be deleted from section 2 and section 3.
How
Are
about
we-
it in
are
an
we
amount
going
not to
by
exceed?
people's raised hands now, or how are we doing this?
Oh, do you want to wait till everyone has their,
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't understand why we wouldn't, now that we found $10 million more, why we couldn't at least net it out to 7.4,
well, I just think, I mean, again, this is my opinion, but we last year, the resolution had an amount that was no bonds, but this is the amount of the expenditures. We hope that we don't have to, but I may tie the hands too much if we go too low. So that's,
But
and
if I
again,
could,
17.4 was when we thought there was only
I-
15 million of surplus.
I'd like to speak to the motion on the table,
Why
please.
can't we
If I,
net that?
excuse me, I'd like to speak to the motion on the table, and if I could offer a friendly amendment to Committee Member Reich's amendment or motion. I think if we limit it to section 3 and just strike the word expected, that gets to what you're trying to do.
I mean, section 2 won't have the kind of logical sentence if we take the
Yeah.
expect word out of
Yeah.
And
I'm okay
Hitesh-
with that.
And Hitesh, does this, as if we take out expected, does this still give us the flexibility for the reimbursement that we're really after here?
I mean, I believe so. I mean, we don't have the legal counsel. I'm not the legal person, but I don't see any problem. Lara, do you? I mean, from section 3, if we take, it's still a logical sentence.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think my understanding, and Hitesh knows these better than I do, but my understanding is that you're more or less setting a cap. It's not going to be more than this. So if you were to, set the cap at $10 million and stuff happens with the budget, and it turns out we really wish we could sell $12 million worth of bonds, even though what we have in the budget is $17 million, you won't be able to, because you will have said we can only reimburse $10 million of the thing. But I think as long as you put a dollar amount there and say that's what we're doing, we're saying that we can essentially reimburse this much, I think it's okay. Whether the word expected there is there or not.
Right. I agree, yeah.
May I?
I will second.
Member
So I
I
think
will
we're still
second
talking.
committee members Reich's motion to strike the word expected.
Okay. So would we vote on that now? Or do we?
After, if there's discussion on this particular motion, we could have that now and then we would vote. But discussion would have to be
Councilmember Kelly, I
limited
think
to
your hands up.
that point.
So I just want to say, I still feel like I still haven't gotten my answer. What did we vote on last year? I looked through the whole 500 and something page budget for the capital improvement. What did we decide on was the amount that we would bond out for the capital improvement budget for 23?
Tash, can you share the last year's resolution on the screen, and then we can all just, you
Oh,
can
no, it's
scroll
not,
through it?
it's
No,
our
no, sure.
budget. It's when we were voting on our budget, there was the capital improvement, and I remember I tried to get it down. Initially, it was going to be, the recommendation was to pass a budget where we would bond in somewhere in the 20s, and it came down, and I appreciated that, and it came down to something, and I just want to know what that amount was that I
So-
believe we voted on it.
Staff never recommended a 20 million or more dollar bond.
Yeah, no,
Put
it was,
a list of projects that was exceeding $20 million and said, we can't do this much. But the city council had expressed an interest in setting the priorities rather than having.
No,
staff set the
there
priorities.
was the amounts that how we were going to cover it. It was listed, and I remember it was like what we would be taking out. So I
But-
know it came down, which is great. I just want to know what was that final number
Ah,
in the
So-
capital improvement budget for
hold on.
bonding.
1 second here. Let me just. Okay, so if you can see this spreadsheet, this actually was many pages long that listed all the projects, but the summary is here in this table. So let me expand it so you can see it better. And what this shows is the green line was the projects that had other funding other than GEO bonds and just needed some matching. Blue line was projects under contract where 2023 GEO bonds had been expressed as a funding source. The red line was the immediate life safety. Purple was high priority goals. Yellow, other projects requested by City Council. So ultimately, it was this $13,258,000. This does not include projects that were approved by the library board separately, which was $950,000. That is not managed by the staff in this meeting. And there were an additional $4 million of projects that we recommend bonding for, but are not abated by property tax, but are abated by the water fund.
So, but on these, okay, so it's 13 million. I thought 13 million, there was another document that I was referring to, but okay, so 13 million plus the 22, which don't exist. So the 3 million. So that comes to about somewhere in the ballpark of 17 million.
Yes.
That's the amount. And that's the amount that you're asking for now, maximum to issue. And I'm saying, since we voted on that and we approved that, not knowing that we had an additional at least 10 million, that it's really not right for us to, we do this with full transparency. We're all discussing, the public's involved, they're watching us decide on our budget, that we should this evening not be, I mean, that was not disclosed. And I understand some of the money, but we should also be able to project and have a little bit of a better idea. We should be able to get a little closer to estimating our surplus budget. But we voted on that with the understanding there was 14.1 million. So this should be reduced. Again, this cost us, this will cost the residents a
Mr.
lot of
Chair,
money.
this discussion is not relevant.
But I
to the
needed that
motion on the
number.
table.
I'm sorry, but
Interrupting her.
nevertheless, that was
Motion.
what I needed to see. I wanted to see that number because I recalled it being around 17 or 18 million. So thank you, Laura. I appreciate it.
So
That
let's-
is
let's-
relevant to me.
Can we vote on the amendment? Can we vote on the amendment to strike the word expected? I think we've had a second on that. So we should vote on an amendment to strike the word expected.
Councilmember Nguyen,
Resolution.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly,
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Committee Member McMillan,
Aye.
Committee Member Rikus,
Aye.
and Chair Livingston.
Aye. All right. So now we're left with the resolution. As we've discussed, there can be additional work to determine the exact amount of eventual bonding that we need to do, and that'll come out of our forecasting. This is about the ability to reimburse ourselves for what eventually that amount is. So do we have a motion to vote on the amended resolution?
I think
That was
there's-
already underlying. So that's, you can call the question on that.
Okay, so I guess I'm calling the question. Do we have a second? Do we have a
Second.
second to call the question?
I think it was, I think, no, I'm not moving to call the question. I think
Okay.
we're just ready to call the question. It was
Okay.
already moved and seconded, I believe,
Okay,
at the
I
top.
think we're ready to call the question on the amended resolution.
So may I just make a comment? I just want to be really clear to staff. I mean, a couple of things. And David, your whole point about the 16.6, and our reserve fund. Mostly when I talk today with S&P and other people with the rating agencies, it's our incredible debt to our pensions. It's not our 16.6 reserve fund that's really harming us most. So I want staff to understand that in no way, there was at least 10 million more, it's probably going to be more before the year's over, in surplus. And that's not right that we would, for a moment, we did vote on that. And thank you, Laura, for bringing that up. But that was with the understanding that we had $10 million less available to us. So I hope that in no way, shape or form will we leverage $17.7 million of debt against our residents. That is a huge expenditure. So I just want to make that very clear.
I mean, Chair Livingston, let me just quickly add this thing to the council member Kelly's thing that, okay, we found these 8 million, 10 million in surplus. How about that we found now 3.5 to 4 million in additional contractual increase in expense? How about we have to fund the insurance fund another 4 million to stay compliant with our budget policy? How about the additional cost on the animal shelter plot? That would take away right there your $10 million, Councilmember Kelly.
So again, I think we don't need to get into that level of detail now. We know we need to do more work to come up with the exact correct sizing of any eventual bond issuance.
I have no doubt that we can figure out a way to spend $10 or $20 million in the city. So Hitesh, that argument to me doesn't hold water. Well, how about we found that we need to spend this much more on these different projects? The problem is you pass a budget and you stick to it. And so I'm just very concerned that in fact, we didn't have all the figures before us. And so now we're talking about telling staff, we're directing staff to say, yeah, if you need to go up to 17.7, even though, this is the budget we passed, budget smudge it, I mean,
I don't think anybody's saying that. I think that you voted for the public service increases that were not in the budget. I think that, there's been other commitments by the city council
for any
relative to
increase.
spending.
What public service, what are you talking about, David?
The police and fire increases.
That wasn't an increase. We kept the levy flat and I fought very hard.
No, for the pension, for the union.
No, increase in
For the union.
expenditure, Councilmember Kelly. We are spending more on those contracts
right,
now.
but we're also
by
spending
millions of
18
dollars.
million in finance fees and interest rates on that. So this is costing our residents a ton of money by underfunding our police and fire.
Well, I wasn't talking about the pensions. I was talking about the wage contract. So I think, look, we're ready to vote on this amended resolution and let's vote on it.
Councilmember Nguyen,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Kelly,
No,
Councilmember Nusma,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Committee Member McMillan,
No.
Committee Member Rikus,
Aye.
Chair Livingston.
Aye. Very good. That was our last order of business, I believe. There's nothing else that we needed to do.
That's
Anybody?
it.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Yeah,
believe we are adjourned. Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.